Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
And Mays is the best player that I've ever seen.
I rate Mays as the best all-around player I ever saw.
Willie Mays, the best player that I've ever seen, I think, or broadcast for all around, no question in my mind. And
welcome back. Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. This is Douglas Viviani, sans David Cohen. He's under the weather, so not here today, but that's okay, because I have a terrific guest host, so to speak, this week. Those were some statements from 3 Hall of Fame and baseball announcers, Jack Buck, and who do we hear? Kurt Gowdy, and then Ernie Harwell, and they were talking about Willie Mays. And where does that come from? Well, I don't know if anybody's a baseball fan. I'm listening to Everything Old is New Again. We've done many baseball shows, so I know there are plenty out there. The idea is that Willie Mays is someone that is the subject of a terrific new book called 24, Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. It's by Willie Mays himself and Jon Shea, and we are happy to have Jon Shea with us. And he is the author of 4 baseball books, including Rickey Henderson's autobiography, Off Base, Confessions of a Thief. He is an award-winning national baseball writer at the San Francisco Chronicle and appears on the MLB Network. Jon Shea, thank you for welcome. Thank you for coming on board. Welcome to Everything Old is New Again.
Well, hi, Douglas. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. You have a tremendous book. I want to get into it a little bit, but first we need to talk about Willie Mays. We're a show that, of course, looks to the past, shines a spotlight on the past, and then how it affects what we're doing today, and that's exactly what this book is. But before we get there, Willie Mays, if anybody's not aware, had 660 homers, 3,283 hits, 338 stolen bases, 12 straight Gold Glove awards, 24 All-Star Game appearances, beating Rod Carew, a guest of the show, who had, I believe, 18. So how about that? And he was Rookie of the Year, 1954 World Series champion, 2-time MVP, a lifetime batting average of .302. And I'll tell you, he won a batting title in 1954. He was, of course, we know this, my grandfather's favorite player of all time. I've said that before. My grandfather saw Ruth Gehrig and all the players of the 20s through the 80s.
Wow. And
Willie Mays was his favorite, replacing Mel Ott. So that's a little hint there that, of course, he was a Giants fan, but that doesn't mean that his opinion was wrong in any way, shape, or form. Listen, John, this gentleman, Willie Mays, in today's world, I don't know that kids that are under 35, let's say, or people under 35, appreciate how much of a social icon he was and what an amazing ball player he was. We hear that song, Talking Baseball, here and there, but other than that, until this book, I don't know that we've heard all that much about Willie recently, and I'm wondering if you could tell us why you did this book with Willie, and do you think it'll raise the spotlight a little bit more, as it should be, on Willie Mays?
Yeah, I imagine it will. Listening to those great broadcasters, Buck and Gowdy and Ernie Harwell, I mean, I added Vince Scully to my list of folks I interviewed, McCarver, Enberg, Costas. Bob Costas wrote the foreword, and it's spectacular. It seems like there's a general theme. They all say how great he was overall and what he meant to the game, not just as a ball player, but as a man, breaking color barriers of his own in the minor leagues. And the Giants were the 4th team to integrate back in 1949, 2 years before Willie joined the team. This is at the very beginning. I mean, this is Willie Mays, who came up just 4 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, and he's 89 now. And it's such a terrific story, and it's not just his feats on the field, but this is a man who didn't smoke or drink and didn't ever get thrown out of a game or even charge the mound. And pitchers, as you know, were throwing at him all the time back in the 50s and 60s. So it's thus, it's not just life stories, but life lessons. And he has quite a bit to share.
Exactly. This book has 24 chapters, and of course his number was 24. Each chapter begins with a statement, and we'll get into some of the chapters here and there to get a flavor for it in the show here, but each chapter begins with a statement or a quote from Willie Mays, and he tries to teach a lesson. And I want to read a little something here about what Willie says about his childhood and kind of why he wrote this book, and that'll really introduce us to this, because he says, "I was very lucky when I was a child. My family took care of me and made sure I was in early at night. I didn't get in trouble. My father made sure that I didn't do anything wrong. I've always had a special place in my heart for children and their well-being. And Jon Shea, our guest, and I got the idea that we will do something for kids and fathers and mothers. And that's why this book is being published. We want to reach out to all generations and backgrounds. Hopefully these stories and lessons will inspire people in a positive way. And firstly, you're in the right spot because this is a show that spans generations as well. We try to do the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. And so I really enjoyed the fact that that's the reason for this book. Can you expand a little bit about that, what he's done with children through the years, and why children and learning lessons and teaching children from the parental point of view is so important to Willie?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Thank you. This is the say hey kid, right? And rightly named. He's got still the childhood exuberance. But if you saw him play, you just recall joy and laughter and fun. And the game itself was a game through it all. A business, yes, but a game in his heart. And you see ball players today who celebrate maybe after hitting a home run or making a great catch. Mays sort of celebrated during the play, during the at-bat. He was like a must-see, a must-watch. A lot of guys are must-see at the plate, but you can't take your eye off Reggie Jackson or Barry Bonds or some of these guys. But Mays was a must-see on the field with the basket catch and the cap flying off. And his goal was entertaining people so they would come back tomorrow. So 15 years ago, I approached him for the book project, and the first thing he said was, "I'd like to see this book in classrooms." He's got the Say Hey Foundation, which targets youth, especially youth maybe deprived in areas that aren't the needy, basically. And basically that's what Willie himself was. So from there we went with the inspirational theme, and Willie was all in throughout, and wanted to gear it toward kids, but also realize that, hey, the old-timers who saw me play will want to hear these stories. Everyone in between will want to, know about this man. And I would suggest that, as an American icon, a cultural icon, American hero, not just in the sports or baseball world, it's an inspirational tale that's probably needed more than ever today.
Right, and not just inspirational, it also presents lessons learned, but I think it's a genius way kind of that is done in that it will present the lesson and the message, but it also, each chapter then will dive into the specifics of a story about or a point in Willie's life, and talk about DiMaggio and talk about Mantle and all the different characters, Cepeda, all the different characters that he went and met in his life, and how they affected him, and how that relationship or that story or that event then teaches that lesson, or those 24 lessons. So I should say it is a great book for both, because the kids can read it for the lesson and to learn that inspirational point of view, which we'll talk about as we go on in the show here. But also, parents, believe me, will want to read this book for all the behind-the-scenes stories that there are and the lessons that Willie grappled with and achieved through these experiences. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it, because many of these books, you don't have that. It's more or less just kind of a biography of this, making the statistics come alive and what happened in the various ball games. But this is not it. It's not just the ball games. It's what happened in his life as a result of these different experiences that he had. I hate to filibuster like that, and I'm doing so because we're coming up on a commercial. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again to talk all things 24, life stories and the lessons from the Say Hey Kid by Willie Mays and our guest Jon Shea.
Say who? Say Willie. Say hey. Say who? Swinging at the plate. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie.
These days, the news is full of teen suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, bullying. It's depressing and concerning, but there is hope. WWE Intercontinental Champion Mark Merrow.
Champion Choice is a live presentation that empowers students to make positive choices and live their best life. I teach students how to live a drug-free life, prevent bullying, avoid peer pressure, and keep negative people out of their lives. We are defined by our choices. There is hope.
To schedule a Champion of Choices presentation for your school or organization, visit thinkpos.org. That's thinkpos.org.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
There's a long drive way back in center field, way back, it is Willie Mays just brought this crowd to its feet with a catch which must have been an optical illusion to a lot of people.
How about that? An optical illusion of the catch in 1954 World Series. If you're a fan of baseball, you've seen Willie Mays make that catch in right field and then make that throw, turn and pivot, make that throw, a crazy catch of Vic Wertz. We're here on Everything Old is New Again, talking all things Willie Mays and the lessons learned in life with Jon Shea, author of 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid by Willie Mays and Jon Shea. Of course, Amazon has this, and it's a tremendous book. Willie Mays himself, in a chapter that focuses on that catch and the lesson that might have been learned, says, have fun with everything you do. Be comfortable. No need to act like you're somebody else. Be yourself. That's good enough. And it's a simple message that is easy to be forgotten as an adult, but also is something that kids struggle with as they grow up, to figure out who are they, and should they be the comedian, should they be the baseball player, should they be both, whatever they are. And there's a chapter here called Act Like You've Been There Before, the story of the unique and elegant style. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe that chapter and the lesson learned there by Willie as he presents it to us.
You're right. When we spoke about the format of the book, Willie and I talked about providing lessons right at the start of every chapter, whether it's one sentence, two sentences, three sentences, just in and out, and then elaborate throughout the chapter. And that particular chapter, obviously, it's the greatest catch in baseball history, at least the most famous, but in Willie's world, it didn't even rank in the top two or three.
Right.
So imagine that. Yeah, and it's about not giving up. It's about keeping your eye on the ball, literally and figuratively.
And I have to apologize, John. I made a mistake there. I want to correct myself. The quote for this particular chapter is, be confident you'll do what you set out to do, because confidence is key. You'll get it done. Never lose sight of your dream. That's keeping your eye on the ball. That's the chapter on the catch. So either of those you want to talk about, but I think it's such two great lessons of being yourself and another chapter of never losing sight of your dream.
You're right. There's a separate chapter on the catch. There's a separate chapter on the basket catch. And the catch, obviously, was Game 1 of the 1954 World Series. And he's first year out of the military. He came up in 51. May of 52, he's called in to serve, misses the rest of the year, misses all of 53, and then comes back in 54 and just takes the baseball world by storm. MVP, a batting champion. He made the great catch in Game 1 of the World Series against the mighty Cleveland Indians, who won 111 games and were supposed to sweep, but it was the Giants, spirited by the Mays catch in the 8th inning of Game 1, to preserve a 2-2 tie, and then they won in extras was the beginning of a sweep for the Giants. So the team that wasn't supposed to win a game won 4 in a row, and it started with the Mays catch. So the chapter really breaks down the game itself, the fact that, as Bob Costas said in there, it's just TV was in its inception, and baseball on TV was just getting going, especially in the World Series. It was black and white. Fortunately, the people holding the cameras captured Willie on the run and making that great catch. And as Willie says in the book, it wasn't the catch because I knew I had it. And imagine that, he's playing shallow. And in the Polo Grounds, when it's 482 to dead center, and the ball's going anywhere between 450 and 460, based on where we saw it in the film and accounts at the time, that he had it all the way. And it was more of the throw that was going to be the game changer here, because 2 runners aboard, Al Rosen at first, Larry Doby at second. The catch made it the second out. So these guys, if he didn't make the play, would have scored easily, and the Indians would have been up 4-2 in the 8th. And then who knows what would have happened in that World Series. But Mr. Mays chased it down. He made the throw on the run, and his cap flew off, obviously. And it's somewhat of a basket catch. It was over his shoulder, but his glove and palms were pointing upward. So he makes the catch, he turns, he throws, and Rosen has to go back to first base. Doby can only tag and go to third. They get out of the inning, and Dusty Rhodes hits a pinch homer in extras, and the Giants win. So there's a lot to be said about that culturally, about society at the time, the game itself, the fact that, Willie and Hank were just coming into the league as the fresh new African-American superstars in the wake of Jackie breaking the color barrier. And it was a new time for baseball, and it was a few years after the war, the baby boomers, and all that stuff. It was a great time for America, and finally, Mays and Aaron taking baseball by storm and America by storm.
Right, and he was able to kind of navigate through that difficult time from the Negro Leagues to the Major League, and the amazing pressure of doing that at that time, because he, as he says here, he acted and had a feel for who he was. He was confident in himself. He knew who he was going to be. As we quoted before, he wanted to, just be himself. But besides that, it's amazing how he had the confidence in not just that catch, but in life. He had a dream. He never gave up on that dream. I mean, he started playing baseball professionally at 17 in the Negro League. So it's amazing that, he was that focused, that early on, of course, that talented, to be able to reach for that dream and never stop dreaming and never give up on that dream, even though when he was playing, think about it, because of the color of his skin, out nonsense, he was unable to, when he began playing, even think about, as a child, until Jackie Robinson, broke the barrier, to be able to actually play and do what he wanted to do. In other words, to achieve his dream was against the law. But he still didn't give up on that dream, and he achieved it.
He was born in the Jim Crow South, Great Depression, born into poverty, just outside Birmingham, Alabama. Martin Luther King called it the most segregated city in the country, and that was in the 60s. So imagine, he was born in 31,
right.
Played ball through the 40s, 48, 49, and 50. He's playing with the legendary Birmingham Black Barons, his team in his backyard. And as a kid, he's thinking, if I could play with the Black Barons, that's all I need. That's the ultimate.
Right.
That's as far as he thought he could go, because there was no black man in white baseball. And then when Jackie was signed to play in 46 for Montreal, the AAA team of the Brooklyn Dodgers, Willie's dad came to him and said, now you got a chance. And Willie's saying, what do you mean I got a chance? He said, well, now you got a chance to play in the major leagues because of Jackie Robinson. A year later, Jackie breaks the color barrier. And by then, Willie is 16 and playing in some small Negro League minor league teams. And then he's so good that the Birmingham Black Barons sign him up to play in 1948. And he's a high school kid, but he's so good and so fast and so prominent defensively that he's a center fielder at that age. And playing at Rickwood Field, by the way, it still exists. And you and everyone should go there. This is just walking into history. This place was built in 1910. It's the oldest existing ballpark in the country, and it's gorgeous. It's in Birmingham, and that's where Willie Mays and his Black Baron teammates played in 48, 49, 50. And the 48 season, that was the final Negro League World Series. Jackie was in, Newcomb was in, Monty Irvin. So Negro League baseball began to wane, the interest, and everyone was focused on Brooklyn and Mr. Robinson and the American League, and especially the Yankees and Red Sox were slow to integrate, but the National League was starting to do it. And the Dodgers and Giants, the first two in the National League, in fact. So Mays is breaking the color barrier as soon as he leaves the Black Barons in the league he played in, the Interstate League, because the Giants signed him out of the Negro Leagues and assigned him to the Trenton Giants, and the Interstate League is all white. So imagine this teenager, he just graduates from high school, and playing with all these legendary Negro League players who are in their 20s and 30s, and then he's signed by the Giants and reports to Trenton. He's the only African-American in the entire league. So
Right.
he's hearing all this stuff that he couldn't have imagined. And I got to tell you, at one point in our conversations, he looked at me and said, I just wondered if it was all worth it.
Right.
And it kind of gave me chills, because I'm thinking, what do you mean? Can you imagine baseball with no Willie Mays? It just wouldn't have been the same.
Well,
and fortunately, it was worth it to him, and he didn't let the bigots win, and was better than them, and lived this honorable life, and had this great career, and turned out to be a wonderful story. So fortunately for all of us, he kept playing and broke into the big leagues a year later with that 51 team, and found himself in a World Series, and then after the military, made the great catch in 54.
Right, and all of that due to, in some ways, his inner pride, his inner confidence, and the lessons that he's learning and learned and tries to present to us in 24 life stories and lessons from the Say Hey Kid. We've having a great time here with Jon Shea. We're going to continue when we get back right after this. Everything Old is New Again. Life lessons and life stories and lessons from the Say Hey Kid. The book is 24 by Willie Mays and Jon Shea. We'll be back right after this, and Everything Old is New Again.
They knew them all from Boston to Dubuque, especially Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Well, Case.
Here with John Billingsley, and we're talking about the Hollywood Food Coalition. John, what is this?
Well, I'm the president of the board. We serve a hot, nutritious 5-course meal to hungry men, women, and children 7 nights a week, 365 days a year. Been doing it for 33 years. We distribute clothing and shoes and blankets and backpacks and you name it. And we help people access a huge array of other services from partner groups. And if you'd be interested in making a donation, hofoco.org, $3 buys a hungry person a great 5-course meal. hofoco.org.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
The rule that we had when I played this one hand, it go left or right. Anytime that hand move, you got to move. That's the only rule we ever had in the outfield. Now, if you didn't see that, you didn't play the next day. Very simple. I ran the field.
How about that? And I'm running Everything Old is New Again. Boy, that makes me feel powerful. This is Douglas Viviani, and we're with a co-author of 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid by Willie Mays. It's amazing. We have Jon Shea, the co-writer of that book, right here, right now. And it's a story that was taken from and gathered with 200 interviews with Hall of Famers, teammates, opponents, Negro Leaguers, managers, commissioners, childhood friends, celebrities. Even 3 presidents appear in this book. There are stories surrounding and around the colleagues, if you will, of Willie Mays by, Hank Aaron, Reggie Jackson, who else? Pete Rose, Monty Irvin, Willie McCovey. So if you want to hear these stories come to life, I'm telling you, this is a great book to do it with. 24 baseball life stories and lessons from the Say Hey Kid. We heard a little bit back a couple of sections ago a song that was talking baseball, and Willie is the centerpiece of that song, along with Mickey Mantle, of course, and Duke Snider. And he was in I would just say, one of the biggest debates of the 50s. At least, is who's the best center fielder of all of them, and of course the three of them are Hall of Famers. And he's got a chapter in the book, Honor Your Peers, the story of Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. And Willie says at the beginning of that chapter, friends can mean everything, have fun, and laugh with them. You want to keep them close. So was he friendly or friends with Mickey and the Duke, and during those times? It seems like, of course, they were adversaries on the field. What were they like off the field?
Yeah, and I didn't really know this until I really dug into the process of speaking with Willie. During our chats, every time Mickey Mantle came up, he just started laughing and remembering the stories that he and Mickey, even though they played in different leagues and there was no interleague play, they saw each other every year at All-Star games. They saw each other a couple times in the World Series. But they used to communicate, according to Willie. And later, of course, they were part of card shows in the 80s and really got close because obviously there was no real big pension back then, and that was their way, fortunately for them, these superstars of the past that who didn't make a lot of money, to make some money in the 80s for their autographs, signing bats and balls or whatever. So, yeah, Willie and Mickey were kind of close, and they were the same guy in a lot of ways. They were both born in 31. They both debuted in 51. Both played center field. Both played in New York. Both had five-tool talents. They could hit for power. They could run. They could defend, and they can throw, unlike anybody else in the game. Maybe the game's history. Maybe nobody since until Mike Trout came along who could do all those things at that high level. Though Trout certainly couldn't throw like Willie, maybe not the awareness on the bases like Willie. And of course, Willie talks about Mickey. He says Mickey could do two things better than I could. I said, well, what were those? Well, he could run faster. He said he and Vada Pinson were the two fastest players he's ever seen in baseball. And he could hit the ball a lot farther. He said, I would hit the ball one or two rows into the bleachers, and Mickey would clear the bleachers. But he tells funny stories about how they usually were the highest paid players in the 60s in their respective leagues, at least until Musial got out of the game and those folks, Ted Williams. And then it was always, if Mickey made 105, Willie made 106, and if Willie made 110, and Mickey made 111. And so he said they used to communicate because they were their own agents. They didn't have agents. There was no free agency. You were basically at the mercy of the team as to what you could and couldn't do financially. So it was pretty amazing, the relationship. And of course, Duke, the third center fielder with the Dodgers, sometimes he gets ignored because his longevity wasn't quite like Willie's, and maybe he didn't have the five-tool prominence like those two. But if you look at the numbers from 1954, the year Willie came back from the military, until 1957, the Giants and Dodgers last year in New York, those years, Duke was every bit as good of a hitter as those two guys. So the debate in the boroughs was legit. Everyone from Brooklyn to the Polo Grounds to Yankee Stadium, they all had legitimate arguments as to who was the best center fielder. But as the book shows, there was only one guy who lasted as long as Willie Mays, and who was durable and got 660 home runs and all these numbers. But he played, this is a great stat, one of my favorite in the book, 13 straight years, 150 games plus, and that was consecutively. And that's a record that will never be broken. And that streak, by the way, a lot of it came during the 154-game season. So he never came out of the Mickey, of course, messed up his knee early on, and Duke in his 30s wasn't Duke in his 20s, especially when the team moved from Brooklyn to Dodger Stadium.
Right.
So Willie was always able to adjust, whether it was the Polo Grounds or Candlestick Park, and no matter what. But, I mean, you look at all-time center fielders, you look at Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker all the way back there, Oscar Charleston in the Negro Leagues from Mantle and then Griffey and now Trout. I would say there's a lot of reasons that Mays was number one. Joe Posnowski of The Athletic wrote the ultimate top 100 just all these great stories day after day after day. And just a couple of weeks ago, narrowed it down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Babe Ruth was 2, and Willie Mays was 1 overall as the best baseball player in history. And that's pretty significant.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. And he missed 2 years. I think I saw the quote. I might be wrong, but 266 possible games that he could have played in addition to what he did right at the height of his career, right in the beginning in 52 and 53. So certainly in those 2 years, even if he just hit 25 homers a year, he would have been right there with Babe Ruth, and I'm sure he would have hit more than 25. But so the debate goes on, and it's a shame on that front, but it's also it does show you the significance, the gravitas of the numbers. If you take a look at that baseball card and you see the numbers on Willie Mays, it's the consistency, and the numbers every year in and year out are amazing. And I'll tell you, something to be admired. And back in the day, though, I wonder in the 50s if he well, he does talk about it. I would say this. When they moved to, Candlestick Park from the Polo Grounds, although Polo Grounds wasn't a great hitter's park either, from what I understand, but Candlestick certainly wasn't a good hitter's park, especially in the beginning. He talks about in the book, and he says, when life throws you a curve, go with the pitch. And he tells you a little bit about how he changed to modify his world, if you will, and his game when he went to this new environs. And I think we all go to new things, and we've certainly seen new things in the past here, recent past, and had to change our way of doing things. And he says to embrace that, and it's an interesting lesson that he had. He doesn't sort of say, I went to Candlestick, had I only stayed in New York, or had only this or that happened, I would have had more home runs and I would have done better statistically. He's happy with what he's done.
Yeah, and Candlestick, I grew up in the Bay Area, so I went to a ton of games at Candlestick as a kid. It was replaced in 2000 by the new ballpark, Pacific Ballpark, now Oracle Park. But the Candlestick, it was, wherever you lived in the Bay Area, it might have been 80 degrees, but then you got to the ballpark, it was 55 and windy.
Right.
And it was just a terrible place to build a ballpark, maybe the worst place on the planet, right next to the bay, so the winds would come in. And Willie, those first 2 years, realized, he said, this is not a hitter's park, man. I would just drill the ball, crush it to left field, but if you got it in the air, the wind would take it down or blow it foul. So he learned to either hit line drives to left field, and some of them would go out, or get it in the jet stream in right center, and some of them would go out. So he really adjusted to the elements like he did at the Polo Grounds. Like I said, 482 to dead center, but darn near half of that down the line, so 259 down the right field line. And so he got to, 2 years in between at Seal Stadium while they were building the wonderful Candlestick Park. And, by the time they got there, it was, you talked to Felipe Alou and Frank Robinson, both had stories about playing left field there and going back and expecting a ball to go over the wall and then realizing it's just bouncing and, right behind them as they look behind the fence. So it was a real hard place to play. But again, Willie never complained about the elements. He always adjusted to the environment, and in life and in the ballparks.
Right,
and those were two of the toughest places to play.
Exactly, and a great lesson. And listen, not everybody could do that. There are Hall of Famers like Al Kaline. I remember, a straight pull hitter. He's a Hall of Famer, and could not hit the other way. So not everybody could have changed his game or wanted to or would have wanted to, as Willie Mays did. So think of the talent to be able to change your swing and change your approach middle of your career because of where you're playing. And we're playing with, if you will, with Jon Shea and Willie Mays, authors of 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. Tremendous book. You got to get this for yourself and your kids and your family. We'll be back right after this, and everything old's new again.
When the Giants come to town, it's bye bye baby. Every time the chips are down.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything old is new again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
First of all, you've always been my favorite player, even though you wore the wrong uniform. You know that. You were Jasmine, and I tell you that.
really hard to hear there, but I had to play it because that was Vin Scully a couple of years back at 89 years old talking to Willie Mays, telling him how dazzling a player he was and how he was Vin Scully's favorite player, and said it was the best player he ever saw. That, of course, is Willie Mays. We're here talking all things Willie Mays with the author of 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid, Jon Shea, who spent 15 years researching this book, this original memoir with fresh material, previously untold stories about a man who has family values, community values, engages in charitable causes, especially involving children, follows a philosophy that encourages hope, hard work, and the fulfillment of dreams. So I think this is a great time in our history to be behind those dreams. You really want to get involved with 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. Jon Shea's back. John, I just thought that was interesting to hear Vin Scully. He's seen so many ball players and characterizes Willie Mays the best player he's ever seen. For someone that's in the game that way and to make that statement, it's got to have some gravitas.
And Vince Scully, by the way, grew up a Giants fan.
Right.
He loved Mel Ott. You mentioned him at the outset of the interview.
Right.
Mel Ott, who back then, the National League record and American League record, they were sort of separate. Well before interleague play or free agency, there was a lot of pride in the National League record, and Mel Ott had it.
5'11", right?
Willie came along. Yeah, and then Willie hit his 512th, and to this day, he says that 512 is one of the most meaningful home runs he ever hit.
Wow.
More maybe than 400, 500, and so on, those milestones, because it gave him the National League record. Babe Ruth had the American League record. So Vinny grew up a big Mel Ott fan and tried to emulate his high kick. And Mel, by the way, was only about 5'9". He was the only player shorter than Willie Mays, who is in the 500 home run club. Vinny grew up a big Giant fan and then started broadcasting the Dodgers. And, yeah, it was from 1950 all the way through 2016. He was the voice of the Dodgers. But through it all, always said, including in this book, that Mays was the greatest he ever saw. And this is a man who broadcast games for Jackie Robinson and Sandy Koufax and Duke Snider and all the rest of the great Brooklyn and Los Angeles Dodgers. But, Mays was a step above. And I was in the broadcast booth during that time Vinny and Willie were speaking. That was the last weekend of Vinny's broadcast career, and it happened to be in San Francisco. So there are only a few people in there. And that's the great thing about Willie, the access he gave me. I mean, he allowed me in the broadcast booth for the final farewell to Vinny. He allowed me in his home just endless times. We spent more than 100 hours together on the project. When Willie was honored at the annual Scouts Dinner in Beverly Hills every December, he brought his 4 Negro League teammates, and I was in the suite with these 5 legends. And, it goes back to private and public functions. He's gone to hospitals, and I've shadowed him. He hangs with kids and signs autographs and makes their day. And nobody really knows about it because he doesn't promote it.
Right, so now we have access to all of that through you, Jon Shea, with the book 24, Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. Keeping the right attitude in high times and low times makes a big difference. Any position you're in, stay upbeat, make the best of it, and enjoy it. From Willie Mays right there, talking about in a chapter here about the story of his All-Star pride. And, he really was 24 times an All-Star and met all of these players all the time and just had a great attitude through it all. Maybe tell us a little bit about his experience in the All-Star game and what he was trying to do when he played the All-Star game.
We talked about how much he wanted to play and never come out, the streak of 150 games, 13 straight years. Well, that carried over to All-Star games and spring training, too. All-Star games, he wanted to go all 9.
Right.
A couple times he went 10. But when he came in, his first All-Star game was 54, and they told him how the American League just dominated this thing year after year after year. All these great Yankee teams had all these great All-Stars, and they would beat up on the National League foes. Well, Willie said, no more. Let's change this thing. And that's when Hank and Willie were All-Star teammates for the first time. And a few years later, Frank Robinson and all these great African-American players. Like I said, the AL was slow to integrate. Yankees 55, Red Sox 59, 12 years after Jackie broke the color barrier. And the National League took advantage of that. by winning year after year, and it was an incredible dominance by the National League, and much of that was started with Mays back in '54. Fascinating how much of a difference he made to this thing year after year after year.
Yes, and it was an event to watch. It was so much fun. So then he finally gets an opportunity to come back to New York to play for the Mets in '72 and '73. And I remember that series in '73. I was glued to the TV. I know he hit 211, and he wasn't the old, he had Don Hahn replace him in the outfield in late innings and so forth. But he was there for other reasons, and he had to have been a big influence in that '73 team besides Yogi Berra to bring professionalism and know-how. What did he say about playing for the Mets in '73 and his role on that team?
Yeah, he loved it. He was 42 years old. He had a real decent season in '72, '71, going back to his age 40 season. He's with the Giants, and the Giants win the division. He leads the league in walks and on-base percentage at age 40. He hits 18 home runs. He steals 23 bases in 26 attempts. So he's still very good at age 40. Well, the following May, he's traded by Horace Stoneham to the Mets, and Joan Payson owned the Mets, and she was a minority owner of the old New York Giants and absolutely loved Willie, thrilled to bring him back to New York. Now, if you look at that '72 team, he had like the highest OPS, the highest on-base percentage plus slugging percentage. But by the second year in '73, well, that didn't go so well. He had a lot of injuries, the ribs and the knee and the shoulder. And it's the first time in his career, his 22nd season, that he actually went on the disabled list. He knew he was retiring. It was Willie Mays Day in late September. The Mets were not good through August, last place in the division, but put this tremendous run together and won the division and beat the Reds in the playoffs to play the A's in the World Series. And Willie just didn't play much in September because of the ribs, the cracked ribs on a play in Montreal. They needed him for Game 1 because Rusty Staub had a bum shoulder, so Yogi Berra put him in. He got the biggest round of applause during introductions, by the way, Game 1 at the Oakland Coliseum. And it lasted like 5 minutes. It was incredible. You could YouTube that for the listeners. It's pretty touching. And he got a hit that game, and the Mets lost. But Game 2 was the big game because he entered late as a pinch hitter and got the game-winning hit off Raleigh Fingers. But a lot of people will look at that World Series and say, oh, you shouldn't play beyond your years. You shouldn't play past your prime. You don't want to be like Mays. Well, I listened to all that, and I went deep into that World Series and talked to Mets and A's. Reggie Jackson, who played center field that game, talked about this brutal sun. And there are a lot of images of Willie falling down, pursuing a ball, at the plate on his knees, arguing with the umpire. Well, I mean, you could detail that a little more by saying, listening to Reggie and talking about the brutal sun, and I looked at the whole game, and it seemed every inning there were plays that the infielders and outfielders had trouble with every time the ball went in the air. It was really brutal. It was that time of year and at that place, the way the stadium is configured, and it was in the twilight. There were shadows and there was sun. It was tough to play, the bad elements. Willie made no excuse, but speaking with people on the Mets and A's, they said, well, you know, if that game were played when Willie was 25 and he fell, nobody would make a big deal out of it, but now he's 42. And he was arguing at the plate for a teammate because there was what the Mets thought was a bad call. So it's not like he fell down or struck out or made a bad play and was arguing with the umpire, Augie Donatelli.
Harrelson was coming home. I remember this. Harrelson was coming home, was not tagged by, I think it was Ray Fosse, but the catcher. They claimed he was tagged in the rear, and he wasn't. And it was a real important run. I forget the game, which it was late in the series. And so I remember Mays arguing. But besides that, I'm sure that just showed the leadership that he gave to that team. So it's not always what's on the field. For him that year, I'm sure he gave great leadership to that team and provided some great lessons. Because I'd love to talk about this for another 7 hours, but we don't have the time here on Everything Old is New Again. But we can talk about it, so to speak, or visit with it on and in the book 24, Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid by Willie Mays and Jon Shea. Jon Shea's been our guest for the entire hour here on Everything Old is New Again. Jon, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Good luck with the book. It's a great read. I'm looking forward to going back and revisiting it with my kids.
Oh, boy. Thank you so much, Douglas. This was a lot of fun.
24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid by Willie Mays and Jon Shea. We'll be back next week on Everything Old's New Again.
They know them all from Boston to Dubuque, especially with...
Are you getting bummed as summer starts to fade, and with it those outdoor barbecues with hot dogs and mustard? Don't sweat it. Bowers is a mustard for all seasons with a horseradish kick, so you can enjoy the taste of summer all year long.
Spice up a leg of lamb, slather it on a steak, bake in a brie, and of course put it on your favorite hot dog. In true Everything Old is New Again style, we have found a mustard that has been around since 1888 and tastes as new as when the first jar was produced by August Bauer.
That's true. This creamy, addictive condiment has been delighting generations for 130 years. The best-kept secret in mustard is now out of the jar. Bauer's Mustard, all natural, all authentic, always delicious.
Buy a jar online at abauersmustard.com. That's ABAUERS mustard.com. Buy a jar online at abauersmustard.com. That's ABAUERS mustard.com, or from your local specialty stores listed on their website. You've been listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's pop culture entertainment talk show. Find us on the web at everythingoldisnewagain.biz. That's .biz.
See you next week. Same bat time, same bat station.